What's going on, guys? Welcome to another lesson. So in this one, we're going to talk about an incredibly important concept, and that is Python lists. Now, in this one, I want to explain what are these lists and what are they used for, and kind of introduce you to a new way to actually save and work with data. So if you think about it so far, the way we actually store information is using variables. For example, let's say I want to save someone's name. What we usually do is we just start with a variable. We call it, for example, name, and then we say equals, and then we just say input and like all that stuff, and then just what is your name. So that's how we usually store information, right? So the problem with this is that, sure, this is useful if you're asking for just one type of information, but what if you need to store multiple, series of information, multiple types of information even, right? But if you want this to represent a few other things, maybe like numbers, like other forms of information, essentially strings, numbers, floats. So how do you actually do this? So the thing is that let's actually just print this for now. Okay, let's print name. All right, so if I print this, again, it's gonna ask me for the name, and then it's gonna print my name. All right, so how do we actually store more than one thing in a variable? Now, the problem with these variables, as I said, is that when you get to work with more complicated data types, you will have to store information in a list. And that is the introduction to Python lists. So the idea with the lists is that, well, it's a list of information that you can access, and this list is also in order. All right. So again, like, let's say you want to access the second item on that list, you can always do that. This list is always in order. So that's the idea with a Python list. And this list actually can capture a lot of different things, multiple things. So here's how do you actually make a list. So usually, again, as I said, we just have, let's start a new variable. For example, I want to store, let's say the cities that I've visited. All right. So for example, I'm going to say visited cities. And then I would store, for example, Los Angeles. All right. So that's how you would do that usually. So again, the problem with this approach is that you need to, if I want to store more cities that I visited, I need to do like 2, for example, and then I'm going to go to New York or something. Again, it's just that's a whole mess. And what if you want to store a very large amount of information? For example, let's say you want to store the cities, all the cities in an entire country, or like all the countries in the world, or like even something really smaller, like countries, like states in the US. So what would you do about that exactly? And this is where the lists come in. So the way you actually build a list is that it's pretty much the same concept as a variable and data. The only thing is that it actually has a bracket. That's pretty much it. So what I can do right now is, let's say we're gonna do visited cities. All right, I'm going to add information. I'm going to add Los Angeles. All right. And the way you actually add more information is that you come out of this, quotation mark, add a comma, and add more information. I'm just gonna, for example, add Tokyo. All right, and I'm gonna add Paris. And again, it's not just the string. You can actually store different types of data. For example, numbers. You can store, like, for example, a Boolean. You can store a float. So you can store pretty much anything you want. Again, it's just like we started with, I'm using strings right now to just make it a lot easier on us to understand, but that's the idea. For example, let's add a few other cities. For example, I'm going to say London. All right, let's just add London as well. And let's add another city. For example, Moscow. All right, so let's say these are the cities I've visited. Cool. Now, one of the things you want to do is you want to refer to this information, right? So this is how you create a list in brackets. And if you remember, this is actually referring to something very important we talked about, I think it was the second section of this course, and that was subscripting. We talked about like how you can actually grab a piece of a certain like string using subscript and using like, you know, having numbers inside a subscript, right? So this is kind of close to this. So if I want to print, for example, the first item on this list, the way I do this is I'm going to say print, and I'm going to say visited cities, and we're going to do a bracket, and we're going to start 0. Now, if you remember, I did talk about this and the reason why we actually start from a 0. So if you don't remember, I just want to explain it again. When you want to refer to a list or an index in any programming language almost, you start with a 0. And the reason for that is that you're not really counting, because if you want to count, this is 1, this is 2, this is 3, this is 4, this is 5. But the way you do this, the reason you start from 0 is that you can imagine the first item as like a wall or like a line, all right? So that is item 0. That's where you start, right? The starting line. And then this becomes 1, this becomes 2, this becomes 3, and this becomes 4. So that's how you can imagine. This is an indexing type. It's not like a counting type. That's very important to remember. So if I want to refer to LA, Los Angeles, I'm going to put 0 in the bracket, and this is just going to display Los Angeles. Take a look. There you go. See, we just referred to this portion of this data in this list that we just created. How awesome is that? This is going to make your life a lot easier, especially if you're dealing with more complicated data. Now, another way that you can refer to this is actually from the end. Let's say this is a huge list and you just want to refer to it from the end. For some reason, you just want to do that. Again, there are different ways, reasons why you might want to do that. But let's say you want to do that, you want to refer to it from the end. Now, the way you actually refer to it from the end is you use -1, because obviously you can't you can't have -0, right? Because that's not a number. So like you can actually start from -1, and if I do this, it's gonna show me the last item, which is Moscow. See, so this is pretty much how you do it. If you start positive, you want to start from 0, and then if you want to start negative, you start from -1, and this is going to start from the end of the list. So this is something that I want you to get yourself familiar with. It's a pretty important concept, a huge and very important thing that you want to understand in programming. So I want you to kind of practice, and we're going to have some fun practices with this as well, but just want you to make sure you understand the concept here. Now, there are a few things that you can do, because we're not done with this yet. So we have a list, all right, and we know how to refer to items in that list. All right, cool. So how do you actually change an item? So the next question is, again, how do you actually do this? How do you change an item? Let's say I want to change this. Let's actually display 1 here. So if I put 1, we're going to display Tokyo, right? Cool. So how do I actually display, and how do I change one of the items here? And the way you do this is that you actually, again, you start from like the variable that you have, all right? And you refer to the item you want to change. In this case, I have 1 because we're going to change Tokyo. And I'm going to say equals, for example, let's say I want to spell Tokyo differently. Tokyo. There you go. So if I just run this right now, we're not going to get Tokyo spelled this way. We're going to get Tokyo spelled differently, wrong, essentially, right? So if I run this, there you go. See, we got Tokyo. So we had this list, and we use this to change it, right? So one way, again, if you want to make it even more interesting, is that you can say new name. And if I, for example, I'm going to say input, and you can get creative, right? Please enter the new city. Here we go. And then we're just going to say, there you go. So if I actually run this, take a look, see what happens. So it's gonna say please enter the new city. Let's say I'm gonna say Irvine, and if I do that, it's gonna change this value here, this Tokyo, replace it with what we entered. See, so that's how you actually change something. You refer to it and just define it, right? Like a variable, when you define something new, you just refer to it by first of all using this bracket. And then you just define something new, right? And then you just change it, and here we go. You just have a new value replaced in there. So how do we actually add a new value? So the next item is adding new value. That's very important, okay? And that is using a data structure append item called append. So I have a link for you guys in the resource section. You can check it out. This is actually called a data structure. The idea with this is that you can actually work with lists using all these different commands essentially and do something with them. All right. So for example, if I want to add an item, we can use append to add an item to the end of the list. Now, one of the things, if you remember, I mentioned the order of this matters. It's incredibly important. So like, because that's how you refer to it, right? And when you add an item, you essentially add it at the end of it. So when I add a new item, it's going to add it after this city, for example, right? So that's very, very important. That's how you use append function. Now, there are a lot of different functions that you can use actually, like, you know, there's remove, pop, clear, all that. So there are a lot of different things you can do, by the way. And I'm going to leave a link to this. You can check it out for yourself. But the thing about programming, as I mentioned this multiple times, you don't have to learn every single like method or append or data structure, all that. This is something you kind of learn and pick up as you go. You just need to learn the basics and like the structure and understand how to actually start programming, and then rest kind of comes to you with research and everything. But again, I'm gonna leave a link for you to this page for you to check out. But again, the way you do this is you use append. Again, for example, I'm just gonna say append, so visited cities. All right, so we're gonna do that, and we're gonna append. All right, and we're going to add, for example, let's add a city. What do we add? We're going to add New York, for example. All right. So if I add this, we're going to add a new item to this called New York. And if I actually go all the way back, right? If you remember, I mentioned that you can actually use -1 to actually pull the latest, the last item in the list. So if you have this list, which doesn't have New York, and if you use append to add an item to it, all right, so now if I check the last item on this, this should print New York, right? So let's run it and see if you're right or not. Let's take a look at it. There you go. So we got New York. So we just added this New York to the list and we got New York right here. Awesome. So this is how you use append. All right. And another item, another way, again, we got a bunch of here, a bunch, you can check them out. I want to show you the extend. So extend actually is another useful one. The idea with the extend is that you can actually add multiple values. So this would be useful if you need to add more than one, right? So that way we just like add multiple, and it saves time and everything. So the way you do this is, again, you call your variable and add a dot essentially at the end, and then extend. All right, and then you add your parenthesis, and then inside the parenthesis you want to have this bracket, and you need to add your items. For example, I'm going to say New York, and we're going to add maybe another city. We're going to say Las Vegas, and we're going to add another city. Let's say Barcelona. Here we go. So we added 3 cities to this existing list. All right. So if I again pull this one more time, look at the last item, we should pull Barcelona, because the way this adds is that it adds it in order. Again, the order is everything here. So again, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So we can either call it with 7 or with -1. I'm just going to go with 7 and see if this works. And there you go. So we just called Barcelona, and we used a 7, essentially the last one. Or if you want to again call the last one, you can just do -1, right? So either way it works. But yeah, so that's how you work with lists. So definitely check it out, guys. Let me know if you have any questions. This is a pretty important concept, and you're going to be working with lists all over the place in Python. Again, it's a pretty important thing, especially in the data science. So definitely something that you want to look into. I'm going to leave this, again, as I said, the resource in this page in the resource section. Also, we're going to do a lot of practices with lists, so you're going to definitely get used to it. But I strongly recommend maybe creating your own lists to kind of just like get used to typing it, you know, the brackets and everything, like calling the actual variable with their position and everything, so that way you get used to working with them, because it's kind of a new way to deal with data, because usually we use just variables. but just get used to it. I want to make sure you master it. Let me know if you have any questions, guys. If not, I'll see you in the next lesson.